another way that we need to analyze the probability of an event is by looking at what's called a two-way frequency table. A two-way frequency table is a way to organize data in two variables. Here, there's been a survey, and I don't know if you're familiar, but Moe, Larry, and Curly are the Three Stooges. So someone went around and asked both men and women who their favorite Three Stooge was. Now, you should notice some things right away. First off, look at the large number of men who responded. 10, 8, and 12 for a total of 30 versus the women. The women were only 2, 4, and 2 for an 8. Perhaps women didn't like the Three Stooges as much, or perhaps whoever was interviewing went to somewhere where there were a lot more men than women. So that's just something to note as we get started, because that can really affect our data. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to analyze the relative frequency. And the relative frequency is a way to find the proportion or the ratio of people who voted for a certain thing. The relative frequency is out of the total respondents. So our total respondents overall is 38. Yes, there were 30 men, and yes, there are 8 females, but 38 is my overall respondents. So what we need to do is take each solution, each one of our boxes, and we need to set up a ratio over the total number of respondents. So we can say 10 over 38, 8 over 38, 12 over 38, 2 over 38, 4 over 38, and 2 over 38. What that's going to give us is going to tell us what percent of all people voted in each situation. So here we have roughly 26%, roughly 21%, 32%, 5%, 10.5%. I'm just plugging these in a calculator to get these, and this is once again 5%, approximately. So what this means is that if we add up all these percents, 26 plus 21 plus 32 plus 5 plus 5 plus 10.5, all these percents should add up to 100%, because this is 100% of the total population. So what this means, simply looking at it, it means that 26 people who answered the survey, 26% of them were men who favored Moe. 5% were women who favored Curly. So of all the participants, only 5% were women who favored Curly. Does that mean that no men favored Curly? No, it means quite a few did. 32% of the participants were men who favored Curly. So that's the relative frequency, and that's looking at the total respondents. The other way we can look at it is by row. So when I say by row, rows are obviously across. So we're talking about all the men and all the women. So rather than divide by 38, now I want to divide by the totals that are in the row. So when we're looking at men, we know that 10 out of 30 of the men voted for Moe. 8 out of 30 of the men voted for Larry, and 12 out of 30 voted for Curly. Well, I already know this is 1/3, so this is about 33%. This is 27%, and this is 40%. So notice if we just look at the men only here, this helps us break down into what the men voted for. So most of the men voted for Curly, followed by Moe with 33%, and then followed by Larry with 27%. Notice we're dividing once again by 30 because we're only looking at the row, which is the men. We can do the same thing, however, for the women. Over 8, over 8, over 8. These actually work out quite nicely. This is 25%, 50%, and 25%. So we can conclude that 50% of the women voted for Larry, and then 25% of them voted for Mo versus Curly. And that's helpful to know. The other thing you should note, the top vote getter for women was Larry. However, the top vote getter for men was Curly. So it's helpful to break it down by row so we can compare how the men responded versus how the women responded. The last thing that we can compare is the relative frequency by column. Remember, columns mean down. So we can evaluate how people voted for Mo, how they voted for Larry, and how they voted for Curly. Once again, we're going to take our totals, and we're going to create our ratios. So this is 10 over 12 and 2 over 12. If we find those percentages in our fractions, this is roughly 83%, and this is roughly 17%. What this tells us is that for everyone who voted for Mo, because we're still in this column right here, all the voters for Mo, 83% of those who voted for Mo were men. 17% of those who voted for Mo were women. Moving on to Larry, he had 12 votes total, so we're dividing by 12. 8 divided by 12 is 67%, and this is roughly 33%. So we can say that 67% of Larry's votes were for men, 33% of his votes were from women. And the last one is Curly. Curly is 12 over 14 and 2 over 14. 12 divided by 14 is roughly 86%, which leaves 14% below. If we look at his votes, 86% were from men and 14% were from women. So general conclusions that we can draw from this. We could say that Curly was much more liked by men. Notice that he has the highest percentage of men who voted for Curly. The women did not really care for him. Only 14% of his votes came from women. We can also say that Larry was heavily preferred by the women, and the men still liked him, but compared to the other two, not as much. So Larry was more well-liked by the women. Breaking these up into these categories by frequency helps us analyze the data in ways that weren't immediately obvious when we just had the numbers.